Hello, this is Michael from the Audible Local Ledger in Mashpee, Massachusetts, reading articles from the New Bedford Light on Thursday, November 13th, 2025. First article, Fall River Bishop exhorts the U.S. to stop dividing immigrant families. An article by Kevin G. Andrade. Fall River. The Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fall River is calling out the United States government for its aggressive immigration enforcement operations in recent months. Bishop Edgar Moreira da Cunha told The Light in an exclusive interview that the U.S. government's aggressive tactics are only creating chaos and will backfire. Quote, the United States is shooting themselves in the foot because they're doing harm to themselves by the things that they are doing, da Cunha said. Quote, imagine those children who were born in this country and whose parents have been taken away from them. Quote, they're going to grow up with such hatred and resentment from the trauma that they experienced, end quote, he continued, end quote. We don't know what's going to happen to them and how they're going to turn out. As of September, the United States Department of Homeland Security held nearly 60,000 immigrants in detention. Of those, almost 72% have no criminal convictions greater than minor offenses such as traffic violations. The Light has confirmed that the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has detained about 60 immigrants in or from the greater New Bedford area since January 20th. Quote, if they want to deport the criminals, go right ahead, da Cunha said. Quote, you have all my support. But when they divide families and take parents away from children and leave children abandoned, that's not who we are, end quote. The pronouncements are the prelate's first on the topic since January 31st, when he issued a public statement expressing concern for the rescission of a sensitive locations policy that prohibited ICE operations at clinics, courthouses, municipal offices, schools, and religious buildings. In it, he was measured in his tone. Quote, churches are sacred places, long regarded as safe refuge, where anyone can go to seek God's comfort and strength, the statement read. Quote, it is my hope that the prayer that protection once afforded our churches and other special places is not ripped away in the current climate, end quote. Now that he's speaking out, some New Bedford advocates say that they're hoping that he and other Catholic leaders say more. Quote, I absolutely think they should take a stand, said Helena da Silva Hughes, president of the Immigrants Assistance Center. Quote, there's such a huge role that they should be playing on this issue. Quote, the people are getting picked up are their parishioners. Pope Leo speaks out. Da Cunha's words came shortly after Pope Leo XIV, the first ever U.S.-born leader of the worldwide Catholic Church, issued the first apostolic exhortation of his papacy, Dilexi Te, I have loved you, a reflection on the Church and the poor. Leo appears to have placed the Catholic Church more firmly in opposition to the current mass deportation campaign. In the exhortation, Leo appeared to hearken to a 2017 comment by Pope Francis, then interpreted as criticism of the first Trump administration's plan to build a wall at the southern border. Quote, the Church, like a mother, accompanies those who are walking, Leo wrote. Quote, where the world sees threats, she sees children. Where walls are built, she builds bridges, end quote. According to Thomas Groom, a Catholic theologian and professor of religious education at Boston College, the Pope quoted his pontifical predecessor about 150 times in the 80-page document. That, he said, signals an intention to continue in Francis's footsteps, if in Leo's own idiom. But not every Catholic leader supports the position. Quote, there are more traditional conservative bishops who have resisted that, end quote, Groom said. There will be bishops who will drag their butts and won't be enthusiastic, end quote. But he continued, Pope Leo does have a powerful tool to guide the Church so it lines up with his vision. Quote, I think he'll continue to appoint bishops that are more in keeping with his agenda, end quote. Leo's exhortation wasn't just focused on the United States. He was speaking to a world with more than 123 million displaced persons. Quote, I think it would be misreading of the document to say that the Pope is writing directly to the President of the United States, said Hosman Ospino, a Catholic theologian and professor of theology at Boston College. Quote, the U.S. is not the only nation in the world that's confronting realities related to immigration, end quote. Still, the Pope has recently spoken specifically about the current atmosphere around immigration enforcement in the U.S. On September 30th, Leo answered a question from an assembled press outside his Castel Gandolfo residence on maintaining philosophical coherence when it comes to the abortion debate. Quote, someone who says I'm against abortion, but I'm in agreement with the inhuman treatment of immigrants in the United States. I don't know if that's pro-life, he said. On October 8th, the Pope reportedly told an audience of bishops from the United States that the church leadership nationwide should, quote, firmly address the treatment of immigrants. Quote, he's keenly aware of our capacity as a government and as a country, Groom said. Quote, he has an American consciousness and is aware that we could be doing a lot more, end quote, to help the poor. Ospino said that xenophobia and anti-Catholicism have historically gone hand in hand in the U.S., targeting groups from Ireland, Italy, and Portugal, and other Catholic countries during previous immigration waves in the 19th and 20th centuries. Quote, for almost 2 centuries, Catholics in the USA have been forced to develop arguments that being Catholic and a migrant is not an anathema to being an American, Ospino said. Quote, we have had Catholics throughout the centuries making a case for the just treatment of migrants. The recent trend has put bishops in the United States on notice, according to some observers of the Catholic Church. Quote, it's not really an order, but more like a very strong suggestion, said Brian Fraga, a staff writer at the National Catholic Reporter. Quote, Pope Leo definitely thinks that church leaders have an obligation to forcefully speak out in defense of migrants, end quote. Quote, as a sitting Roman Catholic bishop, da Cunha would not be seen as exempt from the Pope's call to do that. Local impacts. Since da Cunha became Bishop of Fall River in 2014, making him the prelate of more than 250,000 Roman Catholics in Bristol County, part of Plymouth County, and the Cape and Islands, he has spoken out in defense of immigrants. In 2023, when Florida Governor Ron DeSantis sent dozens of Venezuelan migrants to Martha's Vineyard, he told the Catholic News Service, our Sunday Visitor, that the Diocese Catholic Charities branch responded with material aid for the migrants. Da Cunha said Catholic Charities handles much of the diocese immigration work. Its immigration department provides legal services to immigrants such as Pascual de Cun Gonzalez, whom ICE took into custody for a week before releasing him in Louisiana. A lawyer with the Catholic Charities represented him in successful asylum petition that preceded that. Quote, we've always been very supportive of our people and our churches, da Cunha had said. The prelate said that church attendance dropped in the first few months of Trump's deportation operations. This is in line with national trends. Some religious organizations have reported drops in attendance as high as 40%. Nonetheless, da Cunha said people have been returning to the pews in recent weeks. Quote, the fear is still there, but it seems to have calmed down a little bit, end quote, he said. But the impacts have been felt in other ways. Da Cunha, himself an immigrant from Bahia, Brazil, had planned to lead a delegation of Brazilian pilgrims to the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. this November. They were to visit the oratory of Nossa Senhora Aparecida, a Marian apparition and patron saint of Brazil, enthroned at the shrine in September 2024 during a mass attended by more than 6,000 Brazilian pilgrims. But on September 10th, Acuna canceled the pilgrimage. Quote, after much reflection, dialogue, and prayer, we have come to the conclusion that, due to current situation facing immigrants in this country, we are canceling our pilgrimage to Nossa Senhora at the National Shrine planned for November 8th, 2025. And, quote, he wrote in an email in Portuguese to diocesan pilgrims, quote, hopeful for the improvement of the situation next year, we hope that then plan a new pilgrimage for the second anniversary of the enthronement of Nossa Senhora. According to the bishop and theologians, Catholic doctrine allows that a nation-state has the right to defend its borders. It also holds that every person has a right to migrate, quote, to sustain their lives and the lives of their families, and that nations should treat people with respect and dignity while administering immigration laws. Quote, policies that impact those two things need to be fair and just and have consideration for the dignity of every person, end quote, Acuna said. Quote, we say every country has a right to protect the border, but we're also saying that people who immigrate are human beings. They have rights, they have dignity, and they have to be treated as such. Greater Catholic resistance. In recent months, some American leadership in the Catholic Church has taken up the Pope's call, according to Fraga, the National Catholic Reporter journalist. Quote, U.S. Catholic bishops as a whole have yet to find a collective strong voice on immigration, end quote, he said. With that said, we've seen a few examples of individual bishops being really outspoken and demonstrating leadership on the issue, end quote. He singled out Bishop Michael Pham of the Diocese of San Diego, who accompanied immigrants to immigration court hearings in June, and Bishop Joseph Tyson of the Diocese of Yakima in Washington, who used a homily to advocate for a parishioner in ICE custody in September. Quote, those bishops might not yet embolden the U.S. Conference of Bishops to find its prophetic voice on immigration and the Trump administration's enforcement actions, end quote, he said. Fraga said that the actions of those bishops and the Pope have angered conservatives in the Catholic Church in the U.S. Quote, it's hard to say how effective the Catholic Church can be in advocating on this issue, just because how polarized lay Catholics in the pews are, end quote, he said. Quote, Catholics, for the most part, take their cues from their own personal political beliefs, end quote. Acuna seemed conscious of that in his interview with The Light. Quote, I know this is a different situation because not everyone feels comfortable when you talk about certain things that feel uncomfortable. There are people who say we talk about politics, Acuna said. Quote, for some people, they interpret this as being involved in politics, but defending the rights of the poor and immigrants is the social justice teaching of the Church. Quote, I intend to continue defending them, but I intend to find a way to do it in a way that does not cause division. Acuna added that he sees the government's current attitude towards immigrants as contrary to the U.S.'s foundational policy. Quote, it saddens me that our country, such a beautiful country with such potential and such a history of welcome, that we're not being more what we always advocated and defended and promoted, he said. Quote, the most difficult part for me is when I see families divided and children suffering because of that. That's not who we are, end quote. Asked why he has been relatively quiet until now, Acuna said the answer was simple. No one had asked him to speak. Quote, I've always spoken when people have asked me to. I'm not avoiding or hiding, but I'm not out with a megaphone on the street. Quote, but I do speak when I think it'll produce something positive. End of article. Next article, Grassroots Movement Takes on Eversource. Citizens Against Eversource needs 74,000 signatures on their ballot initiatives by November 19th. Can they do it in time? This article is written by Abigail Pritchard. On a Wednesday morning in August, a group of people were causing commotion in the Fairhaven Staples. An employee came over and asked them to leave. They were loud and excited with documents spread across the workspace. There was no way they were leaving. Elijah D'Souza and several volunteers from his group, Citizens Against Eversource, had gathered for a cause they care about. He and his volunteers had seen their utilities bills increase sharply in recent years, and they'd had enough. The night before they met at Staples, D'Souza finished writing 6 petitions for ballot initiatives with the help of 2 pro bono lawyers. The initiatives would attempt to change the way utility companies charge their customers, and they needed to be submitted to the state attorney general in just a few hours. The petitions required 10 signatures from verified registered voters, and the documents had to be pristine. D'Souza and his team started an assembly line, printing 3 of each copy and signing them all carefully. They were shooting for 20 signatures. Quote, "It was organized chaos," D'Souza said. Quote, "It was a little stressful in that moment, but nothing was going to stop us from being able to print those and be able to get those signatures in," end quote. D'Souza, a New Bedford construction sales estimator, started the Facebook group Citizens Against Eversource in February. Today it has almost 40,000 members. Tammy Fawzi was in Staples that day, eager to be one of the petition's initial signatories. She said her electric and gas bills tripled in the 4.5 years since she bought her home in New Bedford. After 2.5 hours in Staples, D'Souza and volunteer Kimberly Bree headed to Toby Hospital in Wareham, where more volunteers, the Plymouth and Wareham contingents, were waiting in the parking lot to sign petitions. From there, D'Souza and Bree met with another few volunteers at the Taunton Starbucks. At every stop were groups of, quote, "working-class people doing the best they could to make this work," D'Souza said. Signatures in hand, D'Souza drove to Attorney General Andrea Campbell's Boston office. There he met Christopher Thrasher, the lawyer who helped him with the ballot initiatives, and more volunteers. They submitted their petitions at 4:56 on August 6. The deadline was 5 p.m. The ballot initiatives target fees for the Mass Save Energy Efficiency program. The fact that utilities' profits are separated from energy usage and fees around new meter technology. The Attorney General certified all 6 petitions, 3 of which were backups. A few weeks later, D'Souza and his volunteers began collecting more signatures on their main 3 initiatives, this time from registered voters outside grocery stores and in parking lots. They needed 74,574, and the deadline is November 19th. On October 28th, D'Souza campaigned for his initiatives at a Ward 1 meeting at the Pulaski School in New Bedford. Leo Chiquette, Ward 1 city councilor, introduced D'Souza to a crowd of around 20 people. Attendees remarked that this modest meeting was a far cry from the one 6 months earlier, when an auditorium over 100 angry Eversource customers left with unanswered questions, and a green D'Souza gave the first of many passionate public speeches announcing his group's intention to write ballot initiatives. At the October meeting, Chiquette towered above D'Souza, who spoke for almost an hour before answering questions, waving an Eversource electric bill as a prop as he explained the 3 ballot initiatives. One initiative, Petition 25-43, would ban revenue decoupling, which separates a utility's profits from energy usage, guaranteeing a profit margin. If the ballot initiative passes, utility rates would have to reflect the actual delivery cost and usage rather than allowing revenue decoupling to stabilize or inflate utility revenues. Another initiative, Petition 25-42, would require utilities to make it optional for customers to pay for initiatives like Mass Save, which often services to improve a home's energy efficiency, sometimes at no cost. Mass Save fees are currently included in delivery charges in customers' bills. Delivery charges, which also include charges for the Gas System Enhancement Program and other costs of bringing electricity to homes, are often higher than the cost of energy usage itself. In September, a state audit found Mass Save placed a disproportionate financial burden on gateway cities and environmental justice communities like New Bedford. D'Souza also worries that working-class people cannot afford to pay up front to weatherize their homes and wait for the rebate from the state. According to Kate Peters, Director of Energy Efficiency at Eversource, some incentives for low and moderate income customers don't require an initial buy-in. Instead, Eversource pays contractors for 100% of the work, so there's no charge for homeowners. A third initiative, petition number 25-44, would allow utility customers to opt out of smart meters, which transmit usage data to Eversource without paying a fee. Eversource is in the process of exchanging all electric meters for smart meters. Customers who opt out of receiving a smart meter are charged a $34 monthly fee on top of an initial $42 charge. According to William Hinkle, the external communications director at Eversource, these meters would give customers more information about their usage and significantly reduce Eversource's operational costs, since Eversource will no longer have to collect data from meters. However, Hinkle said that this does not necessarily mean people will see their bills go down. As it stands, anyone who does not want a smart meter in their home will have to pay the fee to cover what Eversource will have to pay employees to go out and read meters. D'Souza objects to this, arguing that Eversource is already paying their employees to read meters, and so there should be no increase in costs if someone doesn't want a smart meter in their home. Getting the questions on the ballot. For the last few months, D'Souza and his volunteers have been campaigning on these issues, traveling around the state, learning on the fly, to get its questions on the 2026 Massachusetts ballot. Citizens Against Eversource needs to collect 75,574 signatures by November 19th so that the towns and cities have time to certify them before they go on to the state on December 3rd. South Coast voters can sign the petitions on weekdays between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. at the DeMello International Center at 128 Union Street in downtown New Bedford. Citizens Against Eversource also plans to circulate petitions around the state until the November 19th deadline. Petitioning locations, dates, and times are listed on the Events tab on the Citizens Against Eversource Facebook page. D'Souza and his grassroots coalition are trying to collect 100,000 signatures, since towns verify all signatures and can throw some out. It hasn't been easy. On a Sunday in October, Bree spent 9 hours collecting signatures outside Stop and Shop in Somerset, even though she swore she'd stop working such long hours. But Bree will do what she has to do for this movement. She'll drive anywhere and has committed her retirement to training volunteers and collecting signatures. She says someone has to do it, and while she has no experience with this type of work, she's doing her best, and people are grateful. Quote, "No matter where on the spectrum you're living, people are feeling it," Bree said. For some people, she said, all it takes is the word Eversource for them to ask, "Where do I sign?" D'Souza has no idea how many signatures they have so far. He and Bree have been training people how to properly collect signatures after a professional signature gatherer hired for another ballot initiative taught them. And now D'Souza says he has people he's never met collecting signatures. Bree and Fawzi said the work has been tough, with just a handful of volunteers putting in the nights and weekends necessary. D'Souza said the system is designed to make grassroots movements like his fail. Many ballot question campaigns get funding from interest groups. The, quote, Yes campaign behind eliminating MCAS requirement on the 2024 ballot received $3.5 billion in contributions from the Massachusetts Teachers Association, according to reporting from WBUR. The only advantage in doing this, grassroots says, is the people. You build connections that end up becoming like family, D'Souza said. The Citizens Against Eversource movement is adamant that it's nonpartisan. This is not political, Bree tells people. This is your wallet. It's green. It's not red, blue, it's green. At the October meeting, D'Souza decried imbalance in the legislature, urging people to think of voting not as a blue or red, but as something for or against the Democratic supermajority. He's also advocated for gas pipelines and criticized mass save. The message isn't universal. On October 28th meeting, D'Souza pointed to the blocking of these pipelines as a reason for high electric bills. Wendy Morrill, a co-founder of the organizer for South Coast Neighbors United, challenged D'Souza's focus on clean energy initiatives. Morrill's group, which recently organized against a proposed waste transfer station in New Bedford's North End, was founded in 2015 to oppose a natural gas project in Acushnet. So what's next? D'Souza is a sales estimator for a local construction company. He stands at almost 5'7" tall, and he doesn't like to tell anyone his age beyond that he's over 30, and that he'll always be mentally young, so he never wants to affirm getting old. He described himself as a constitutionalist who cares about transparency, and he's adamant that he's not doing anything for his own political gain. D'Souza, who describes himself, quote, as a working-class guy, end quote, said jumping into politics would mean taking a pay cut and giving up his privacy, neither of which he's interested in. But he has been approached, he said, about a myriad of seats anywhere from the city level all the way up to the state level, and he's willing to consider running. For myself, I wouldn't do it, D'Souza said, but for the people, I would sacrifice my life for the people, end quote. D'Souza imagines he'd have to run a grassroots campaign and that it might be tricky to win an election without support from the political establishment. I will leave it up to the people, D'Souza said. Quote, I would do it only because they do not have a voice and they deserve to, and nobody else is doing it. In the meantime, what's next for D'Souza and for Citizens Against Eversource depends on whether they'll see their questions on the 2026 ballot. Bree doesn't want to consider another possibility. Quote, at least we're opening the eyes for the public to see what's going on and how unfair it is for the consumers, she said. Quote, I don't want to say if it doesn't go through, but you know what? We'll come back stronger and harder the next time. And that's all I have today from the New Bedford Light. This is Michael signing off. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.